Displaying miracles. So this is considered a very auspicious and special day. And during the Manam festival, the prayer festival. So in India, corresponding to this occasion, during the time of the Buddha, there was arguments and debates with the non-Buddhist masters. The Buddha had debate and with non-Buddhist masters. Chant master and his assistants are receiving blessings and blessed court from His Holiness. And so in Tibet, to commemorate this occasion of the Buddha's displaying of miracles and having debates with non-Buddhist masters, Tsongkhapa instituted this Manlam, the prayer festival in Tibet. And then during the time of the Gendun Gyatso, it was reinstituted. And after coming into exile, we, the Tibetans, couldn't hold this kind of prayer festival for some time. So in 1959 and I think 60, I think we couldn't hold this Manam prayer festival. But after that, whether long or short, we were able to reinstitute this Manam prayer festival in India. So since it's cold today, I thought I would give the teaching on the Jataka tales and others from the throne, from this main temple, instead of doing it from downstairs. And because we are also going to have the teachings on the essence of the middle way from here too, from tomorrow. And so the weather has, especially the weather this time has been so cold, and it's like the weather has welcomed the people from South India. So it would be a memory that you would take with you, having come to the teachings this time. So we have the tradition of reading the Jataka life stories of the Buddha. Where was it stopped yesterday? I think we were on chapter 8 was done yesterday, which is the chapter on Maitri Bala, the king. So in any case, the Buddha lived over 2,000 years ago, and even today, the teaching of the Buddha, regarding the teaching of the Buddha, it is something that people take interest in even today. So with regards to faith, it is they're found in all the different religious traditions, and all these teachings teach love, compassion, contentment, patience or tolerance, and so even those non-believers, the theistic religious traditions teach these principles as well as the non-theistic ones. I'm not sure about the Charvakas, the ancient Indian hedonist school of thought, whether they believed in these practices or not. And in the case of Jainism, they really practice these principles of love, compassion, and so forth, especially sticking to vegetarian meals. And so these are very good practices. So, in other words, all these religious traditions teach love, compassion, patience, contentment, and self-discipline. So these religious traditions for thousands of years have been helpful to human beings. So what is the main experience or the most important experience of human beings is love. We were, right from the beginning of our life, we are sustained by and nurtured by our love and affection. So this is needed for our survival. And therefore, since all these religions traditions are human religions, they all emphasize this practice of love and compassion, which is the most important quality that we could develop. And to support this, to strengthen the practice of love and compassion, we have the different philosophical ideas, such as in the case of the theistic religions, that of Creator God. And so the Creator God is looked at as infinite love, and we are seen as the creation of that God. And therefore, we are, they say that we also need to practice love and compassion. So this is there's a very good reason to practice love and compassion. So if you really seriously practice these principles, love and compassion, then there's no room for fighting and killing one another. Because according to the theistic religions, all the human beings on this earth are the son or children of that God, and therefore we need to take care of each other. In the case of non-theistic religious traditions, we actually see that as social animals, we are dependent on the society or the community that we live in. And therefore, if you feel yourself close to the society, the people, the members of the society, then you will be happy. So if you remain selfish, like a rhinoceros, you will not have that kind of happiness. So as long as you are living in a human society, you need to practice love and compassion. So according to non-theistic religious traditions, it is said that what is believed in is the law of causality, that causes and conditions bring about their cause. So if you harm others, the consequence will be that you will suffer, and if you take care of others, help others, benefit others, then you will have happiness. And therefore, we need to respect each other. The religious traditions, followers of the religious traditions should respect each other, while they should keep their faith in their respective religions, whichever they are following, by seeing the reason that these practices are common, the love, compassion, and so forth. And so with regard to the teachings, it's important that those of you who are listening to the teaching should have the correct motivation, intention to listen to the teaching, and the teacher himself also should have a pure intention without looking for some gain and fame and so forth. And therefore, we should recite this verse of taking refuge in the three jewels and the practice of bodhicitta. To the Buddha and Dharma and this Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I'm enlightened. Through the practices of generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. So since this is the beginning of the teaching that I'm giving, I would recite this text. So, the Buddhism teaches that of taking care of others. But the difference between Buddhism and the other religious traditions is that Buddhism teaches selflessness, or that there is no independent self as such, or a soul. Of course, those traditions which believe in an Atma or a soul say that this goes from one life to the next. And so this soul, the independent soul, which is separate from the psychophysical aggregates, is the basis of their explanation of afterlife, life before and after. So sometimes it looks like this is more convenient to explain reincarnation and rebirth. Whereas in our tradition, Buddhism, it is said that there is no such independent self. But what is said is the subtle mind, the subtlemost mind goes from one life to the next. So in any way, those who do not believe in a creator God they say that there's no need to use reason to prove that we want happiness and do not want suffering. But when you have to talk about life after and so forth, causality, when you need to see that things come through many different causes and conditions, even in the case of the external world, you can see that many different causes and conditions come together to give rise to an effect. So otherwise, it becomes very difficult to explain such things. So when we talk about galaxies, so just as we have in the solar system that we live in, there is a sun and the planets and so forth. Likewise, in other galaxies, there are these systems. So there's no reason why we should deny the existence of other such world systems. So in Buddhism, what is how these are explained is on the basis of the dependent related origination or causality. So causality, in other words, is explained on the basis of understanding that things are interconnected. And so this is the foundation of the teaching of the Buddha, where the first teaching of the Buddha is that of the teaching on the Four Noble Truths. And then to explain it further, in the Prajnaparamita, the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, it is said that things are empty because of dependently related origination. And in the Heart Sutra, we find mentioned that the five aggregates too are empty of intrinsic nature. So what that shows, that the word too or also shows is that a being or a person has no intrinsic or independent existence. And so since the five aggregates themselves, which are the basis of the designation of a being or a person, do not have any intrinsic existence, there's no need to mention that the person or the being designated on that basis cannot have any intrinsic or independent existence. And so the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras explain that of the dependent origination of things in the detail. And then with regard to the third sermon or third turning of the wheel of Dharma, the Buddha says, in one aspect of the third turning, because there is danger for some followers who were not able to take the teaching of the second turning, the Perfection of Wisdom teachings, literally, there's danger for them to fall into nihilism. And therefore, the Sandhi Nirmocana Sutra was taught by the Buddha to help them to interpret the second turning of the wheel of Dharma. And whereas another aspect of the third turning of the wheel of Dharma consists in the teachings like Tathagata Garbha Sutra and also the Sutra at the time of dying. And so the second turning, the Perfection of Wisdom teachings show that of emptiness, which is also called the object clear light. Whereas in the third turning, the Tathagata Garbha Sutra mainly teaches that of the subjective clear light. And I usually also explain this verse which says that the profound, peaceful, and so forth. So the profound and the peaceful refer to the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, whereas the mention of free from elaboration teaches the second turning, and then luminosity and unconditioned refers to the third turning of the wheel of Dharma. So, because at the time of the Buddha, the Indian other Indian traditions believed in an independent self, the Buddha rejected that. And regarding the perfection of wisdom teachings, Master Nagarjuna explains the teaching of emptiness and dependent origination very clearly in his Mula Madhyamaka Karika. And so we should study chapter 1, and then having understood the different logical proofs and so forth to prove that things have no intrinsic existence and so forth, then we should go into the 26th chapter, which shows the 12 links of dependent origination, which begins with that of the ignorance, and so how ignorance arises and so forth and gives rise to the rest of the links is taught there. And then to understand that things have no intrinsic existence, we should study the chapter 18, and then in chapter 24 it shows that though things have no intrinsic existence, that is because that things are dependently arising. And so in chapter 24 it says, Master Nagarjuna's text says that what is dependently arisen is said to be empty and so forth. So since there is nothing which is not dependently arisen, therefore there's nothing which is not empty. And then further, Master Nagarjuna says that by ending or eliminating that of karma and delusions, there is cessation or liberation, and karma and delusions arise from conceptual constructions, and that in turn is rooted in the belief that things have independent existence. And because, and also the Master Nagarjuna says that things have, because of our clinging to things, having some kind of independent beauty or ugliness and so forth, we produce those of attachment, anger, and so forth. So within the Madhyamaka system of thought, there are these two schools, the Savatantra Madhyamaka and the Prasangikas. And the former believes that things, although things are empty of any ultimate existence, yet they have some the objective existence, whereas Prasangikas do not believe that things have any objective existence at all. And so they say that things are merely nominal. So when you really understand the import of these teachings, the reasonings that are used to prove that things are devoid of any intrinsic existence, but that things are merely nominally existent, then you will be able to see the impact of it in overcoming the strong clinging to things having some kind of objective independent existence. So these are not just philosophical sophistry, but they really practically help reduce our attachment and so forth. And so even in quantum physics, it is said that things have no objective existence. And so what Buddhist philosophy says is very similar to that. So the unbiased scientists do investigation into how the reality of things. So I met one Indian nuclear scientist. So he was also someone who had some role in building India's nuclear power. So he told me that the concept of quantum physics, that things have no objective existence, in the West is something new, whereas in India, more than 2,000 years ago, this concept already had been discovered. So, of course, the understanding that things have no objective existence is not used in science, the modern science, to combat our destructive emotions as such. But I know one American psychiatrist who said to me that, from his own experience of treating people with psychiatric problems, that when someone is intensely angry, he said that the person sees the things or the persons whom he or she is angry at as being absolutely negative, whereas the 90% of that negativeness is our own mental projection. And so, as Nagarjuna says, that our attraction to beauty or ugliness in things is because of some idea or perception or conception of some kind of independent existence in things. So if you really need to uproot this ignorance or clinging to some true independent existence in things, it's not enough just to cultivate bodhicitta, this altruistic spirit of enlightenment, but you need to actually develop this wisdom, understanding that things have no independent objective existence. As Master Tsongkhapa says, that by using the fourfold reasonings, may I be able to overcome or clear all doubts about the nature of things. Having gone through the process of listening and reading, reflection, and therefore, in order to really get at this point of how we could overcome our clinging to independent existence, we need to just not study one text, but different texts, such as written by masters like Nagarjuna and his commentators, such as Buddha Palita, the Chandrakirti's Madhyamaka Avatara, and also Prasanapada, as well as the text that we are going to go through tomorrow, the essence of the middle way. And so we need to really read these different texts and see what kind of reasonings there are given by one master to hold on to his own thesis, and how that is rejected by another master through other reasonings. And therefore, by studying these different texts, what we should actually try to develop is gain conviction in the reasonings that are used. So otherwise, if you don't really go through this critical analysis of things, through serious reflection of the teachings, then just basing your understanding merely on what you have heard from one person will not be so stable, because the next time you may hear something else from another person, and then your belief or your understanding would be shaken. And therefore, it's not enough just to say that we should keep our faith in the Buddha because he is a holy man. That's not enough. The Buddha himself has said that, O monks and scholars, just as of gold is tested by rubbing, cutting, and polishing, likewise, the burning, likewise, you should examine my teaching and then accept it. Not because you have faith or devotion in me. And therefore, accordingly, Indian masters have followed this statement and scrutinized the teaching of the Buddha himself and made the distinction between those teachings which are definitive and those which are provisional. And so this is a very precious thing that in our tradition, that we should use logic and reasoning to come to the conclusion of the teaching, the truth of the teachings, not just follow the teaching on the basis of faith. And so in Tibet, we used to have a prayer to what are known as the 6 ornaments and 2 sublime masters of Vinaya. And these did not include masters like Buddha Palita, Chandrakirti, Vimuktisena, Shantideva, and so forth. So in other words, I wrote a text which is a supplication to the 17 Nalanda Panditas, scholar adepts. And the writings of these masters are studied in our monastic institutions where there is extensive study, in-depth study of the teaching of the Buddha. So if you really are not able to follow the teaching of the Buddha on the basis of reasoning, then when people press you for reason, you will not have anything to prove, but you would just swear by the 3 jewels. So that's a desperate situation. So today, when science is prevalent in the world, which actually do not believe things just because somebody says so, whereas people use lots of reasonings and research and experiment, and therefore at such a time we need really to follow reason. And so the teaching of the Buddha, you'll be able to see the profundity and the specialty of the teaching of the Buddha. And so we will go through the Jataka tales of the Buddha. If ordinary beings are not capable of even appreciating the Bodhisattva's actions, how can they follow his example? So the Bodhisattvas are the ones who practice the principle of giving and taking on the sufferings and the negativities of others into themselves and giving their positive energies and so forth to others. So, such an action of the bodhisattvas are something, if they are not the ordinary beings are not even capable of appreciating it, how can they follow his example? Once the Shibis were ruled by a king whose every action was crowned with virtue. Sanjaya was his name, and a man whose valor, discretion, and modesty kept his passions firmly in check and led him to become victorious and mighty. Chapter 9. Because of his great virtue, Glory Faithful has an honest lover followed him. As an honest lover, followed him as frequently as a lion guards its den. Due to his constant and strict respect for the elders, he had mastered the mysteries of the Vedas and metaphysics and had become skilled in the administration of justice. His subjects, therefore, enjoyed the benefits of security and peace and performed their tasks with the utmost joy and devotion. So the text is written in part verse and part prose. He honored all who came before him, whether they demonstrated their merit in spiritual practices, science, or the arts. Next to him in rank, though in no way inferior in virtue, was his son and heir apparent, Vishwantara. Though still a youth, he possessed the tranquil mind of an elder. Though full of energy, he was naturally disposed to patience. Though learned, he was free of conceit, and though mighty and celebrated, he was without a trace of pride. The reputations of all others traveling on the path of virtue paled beside his. He was renowned throughout the three worlds. Vishwantara could not passively endure the great sorrow and countless sufferings of humanity. Against these foes, he waged a mighty battle, shooting innumerable arrows of giving from his mighty bow of compassion. Every day he gave the mendicants without question and without restraint more than they asked for, and he adorned each gift with the kindness of words. So this Prince Vishwantara was someone who was very used to giving, generosity. The prince also strictly observed the holy days. After bathing and donning a garb of white linen ornamented by tranquility, he would mount his great white elephant, swift and eager, its body graced with auspicious marks, its color and sights like a peak of a snow mountain. On this fabulous beast, the prince would visit the alms halls he had established all over the town, oases for mendicants, where they would receive whatever they desired. For those inclined in giving, riches yield the greatest pleasure when given to the needy, and the enjoyment of such giving cannot be compared to ordinary joy. Words of such extraordinary charity, proclaimed everywhere by the happy beggars, spread far and wide. Soon a neighboring king heard the prince's generosity and conceived a crafty plan to rob the prince of his royal elephant by deceiving him through his passion for almsgiving. To bring this about, the rival king dispatched a group of Brahmins to the land of the Shibis. As Vishwantara was inspecting the alms hall, his happiness continually increasing, the bright beauty of his face, these shrewd Brahmins, uttering benedictions with uplifted hands, placed themselves directly in his path. Respectfully, the prince stopped his great elephant and asked them their business. "Tell me what you have come for," he said, "and it shall be granted." "We seek your joy in giving," said the Brahmins, "as well as the qualities of your elephant with its graceful gait. These make us seem like the neediest of beggars. Fill the world with astonishment, O Prince. Present us this great beast, as beautiful as a peak of Mount Kailasha, and be joyful." The Bodhisattva was filled with happiness, for it had been a very long time since he had been asked for so great a gift. Yet, he considered, what use have these Brahmins for such an elephant? No doubt it is a trick of some king whose sorry mind is clouded with greedy, jealousy, and hatred. Still, he must not be disappointed in presenting me with this opportunity without care for his own reputation or the precepts of right action. He is advancing my welfare. Whereupon the great being stepped down from his magnificent elephant and, standing before the Brahman's gold pitcher uplifted, pronounced solemnly, "Pray accept this offering." Even though the prince knew full well that the science of politics does not follow the path of right conduct where wealth is concerned, he joyfully gave away his elephant out of devotion to the Dharma, and he watched with delight as the great elephant, adorned with its lovely golden lattice seat, a massive cloud radiant with a flash of lightning, walked off in the hands of the strangers. The citizens, however, who were politically attuned, hearing of the prince's gift, were overwhelmed by distress. The elders of the Brahmins, ministers, military men, and townspeople descended on the court of King Sanjaya. Filled with agitation and resentment, they ignored the restraints due their monarch and expressed their anger. How can your majesty sit there and do nothing? The fortune of this your king is being carried off and your kingdom is being seriously weakened. The king, alarmed, asked what they meant, and they replied, "Are you not aware of what your son has done? That splendid beast, whose fragrant face intoxicates the bees and imbues the wind with the sweet perfume that maddens the other proud elephants, that war elephant, whose brilliant strength subdued your enemies and lulled their pride to sleep, that embodiment of victory was given away by Vishwantara at this very moment, and at this very moment is being led away." So, of course, in those days, such elephants are considered very valuable because they could be used in wars and battles against their enemies. So this special elephant was given away. Grain, clothes, food, gold, such are the goods fit to give to Brahmins. Parting with our strongest elephant, symbol of great victory, is no act of charity, but an act contrary to reason. The prince could never rule with success, for he is oblivious to the most basic principles of politics. Forbearance is out of the question in this matter. Your Majesty, do something, lest he bring further comfort to your enemies. So the king loved his son deeply. On hearing such words, he was not kindly disposed towards the speaker. So the Kadam tradition that spread in Tibet, there are three strands of this lineage. Kadam Lamrimpa, the stages of the path tradition, and then the Kadam Shungpawa, the scholastic tradition, and Kadam Mengakpa, the pit instruction lineage. So Kadam Shungpawa, the scholastic tradition, used 6 texts for their study of the teaching, which consists of the Udhana Varga, and then this Jataka tales, and then the Shantideva's 2 texts, and then that of the Abhisamaya Alamkara and the Bodhisattva Bhumi. So the first 2 texts, the Udana Varga and the Jataka tales, are the texts which are basis for that of faith. So in the case of the followers of the teaching, there are 2 types of beings. One of the intelligent ones, and then those of the less intelligent ones. So Master Haribhadra, who comments on Abhisamaya Alamkara, mentions these 2 types of followers of the teaching. And those who are the intelligent ones actually do not immediately grow faith in the teaching, but they follow reason, and they actually check what the content of the text is, and what's the purpose of writing the text, and the link or the connection between the earlier and the latter parts, and the ultimate purpose. So just by those who say that, oh, this text is very valuable and precious, without using any reason, are those of the dull-witted, and the ones who do not follow or keep faith in the teaching just because they are holy, but use reasoning, are the intelligent ones. And so in Tibet we have this tradition of doing extensive study of the teaching of the Buddha, and thereby doing a lot of analysis and critical analysis and investigation into the teaching. And if you are able to build your faith on the basis of such reasoning, then you will be able to become a learned follower of the Buddha based on reasoning. So I stop the Jataka tale, and next I'm going to teach the 8 verses of mind training, and in praise of the dependent origination. So the text that you have been given has both the Tibetan, Chinese, and English. So the reason why I asked to print these 2 texts, as it is said in the Jataka tales, regarding bodhicitta, which regards others more important than oneself alone. So bodhicitta, which is based on reasoning and seeing that the faults and the disadvantages of self-cherishing attitude, and seeing the benefits or the advantages of cherishing others over oneself. So for this, this practice of bodhicitta based on understanding the disadvantages of, in other words, equaling and exchanging self and others. The text we have the Shantideva's Bodhisattvacharya Avatara. So in order to be able to do this practice of bodhicitta's equaling and exchanging self and others, it's also important to study the 6th chapter, which is the chapter on patience, written by Master Shantideva. And then the 8th chapter teaches that of equaling and exchanging self and others through much reasoning. And so self-cherishing attitude, this has been a cause to ruin us since time beginningless. So in every occasion, self-cherishing attitude is the one which brings us ruin. And then, with regard to understanding the emptiness, we need to study Chandrakirti's text, Madhyamaka Avatara, and so forth. So Shantideva's the Bodhisattvacharya Avatara really could cause us to see the real disadvantage or the pitfalls of self-cherishing attitude and the qualities of the good qualities of cherishing others over oneself. So with regard to practice of bodhicitta, we have the text written by Langri Thangpa, Geshe Langri Thangpa of the Gadam tradition, the 8 verses of mind training. So this is a short text, You can memorize this text, and if you reflect on the text occasionally, it would be really helpful. So bodhicitta is not only something that is a good motivation. So as Shantideva says, if you are not able to exchange your joy and happiness with the suffering of others, leave alone reaching Buddhahood, even in samsara you will not have happiness. So if you remain selfish, leave alone reaching Buddhahood, the omniscient state, but even in this life, you will have lots of problems, disturbances. If you look at the world today, even human beings, of course the scientists say that, even the scientists say that the basic human nature is compassionate. So we are brought up through the love and care of our mother. Mother breastfed us with love and compassion. And so love and compassion are the factors which bring us together, whereas anger, hatred actually expel others from us. If you don't think of others, you will remain lonely, because you need to depend on the community or the society that you live in. Whereas if you don't take care of the community at large, then you will have all kinds of suspicions, doubts, and accordingly all kinds of negative states of mind, such as attachment, anger, and so forth, arises. So the natural disasters are something that are beyond our control, whereas because of our selfish attitude, not really thinking of taking care of others, whether they are big or small nations, they always have problems. Even at the family level, if you are selfish all the time, you'll not have happiness in the community, in the family. Even with regard to animals like cats, if there is a cat who is always selfish, the rest of the cats will not come to that, and that selfish cat will remain lonely. So it is true what Master Shantideva has said, that selfish attitude will not lead to Buddhahood, leave alone reaching that. Even in this cycle of existence, you will not have happiness. So Chandrakirti says that first we have this idea of I or yourself, and then you will have clinging to mine, and then this will have a repercussion on yourself, like that of a water mill that is constantly turned by the water of our grasping at a self, independent self. So whether you are a believer or not, it's very important to reduce this selfish attitude, self-cherishing attitude. So even those believers of theistic religions could see the pitfalls of self-cherishing attitude. So since our problems are rooted in, on the one hand, on this rooted in the self-cherishing attitude, the opposing factor to that, the countermeasure to that, is the cherishing others over oneself. So this 8 verses of mind training teaches the bodhicitta as well as the view of emptiness. So because of reflecting on bodhicitta, and Master Langri Thangpa's Doja Sengye was also known as the Lang Thangpa, with a serious face all the time. He was said to cry constantly, with a determination to achieve the highest aim for the benefit of all sentient beings, which surpasses even the wish-fulfilling gem. May I hold them dear at all times. So maybe I first received a teaching on this text from Tata Rinpoche. In any case, I have received the teaching from Gyabje Tshang Rinpoche as well. So the higher rebirths that we seek, they come through independence on others. So a good life in the next rebirth comes through dependence on other sentient beings. So, and in such a higher rebirth, to have longevity and good health and so forth, comes through dependence on others, because we should restrain harming others, therefore others are involved. So in other words, what we should do is this mind that we have, which is full of self-cherishing attitude and also grasping at true existence of things, should be transformed so that you are able to progress along the path and tread the 5-tiered path, culminating in that of omniscient state. So the understanding of emptiness serves as the antidote to our negative, destructive mental afflictions, and this to support that we should have the bodhicitta. Whence whither I interact with someone, may I view myself as lowest amongst all, and from the very depths of my heart respectfully hold others as fondly superior. So disregarding others happen to us. When we, for example, when we give some alms to beggars, we actually have this attitude of looking down upon the beggars. Whereas what we should do is give respectfully to that beggar. So, though we do practice giving alms to beggars, we should not look down upon them, disregard them, but we be respectful to them. So this is one of the qualities of higher rebirth, or conditions for higher rebirth. So Master Nagarjuna's Ratnavali mentions that there are 2 aims that we should achieve. One is higher rebirth and the other is definite goodness. And so in order to reach definite goodness, which is liberation and enlightenment, we should first achieve that of higher rebirth. In all my deeds, may I probe into my mind, and as soon as mental and emotional afflictions arise as they endanger myself and others, may I strongly confront them and avert them. So the 2 practices, the 2 main practices are the bodhicitta and the view of emptiness. So these should be combined to combat our negative emotions. When I see beings of unpleasant character oppressed by strong negative feeling and suffering, may I hold them dear, for they are rare to find, as if I've discovered a jewel treasure. So these those who are provoking negative emotions in us should be treasured. When others out of jealousy treat me wrongly with abuse, slander and scorn, may I take upon myself the defeat and offer others the victory. And especially when someone whom I have helped or in whom I have placed great hopes mistreat me in extremely hurtful ways, may I regard him still as my precious teacher. So when you practice the wisdom and method, you should not actually look for some kind of a fame, or whether someone would praise me or disgrace me and so forth. You should not have such concerns, worldly concerns. In brief, may I offer a benefit and joy to all my mothers, both directly or indirectly. May I quietly take upon myself all hurts and pains of my mothers. May all this remain undefiled by the stains of the 8 mundane concerns. So on top of avoiding the mundane concerns, you should be able to see that things are like illusion. And therefore it says, and may I, recognizing all things as illusion. So here we need to understand how things exist. We need to do investigation into the reality of things, whether they exist the way they appear to us or not. And so for that, we should study Mula Madhyamaka Karika and Buddha Palita. In Buddha Palita, in one of the chapters, it says, if things were to have any intrinsic identity, what is the need for designated imputation? Dependent imputation. So this is a very powerful statement. And Master Nagarjuna also says in the Mula Madhyamaka Karika that what has arisen through, what arises through dependence is said to be empty, and so forth. So if you study in depth these texts on Madhyamaka philosophy written by Master Tsongkhapa, such as the commentary on Mula Madhyamaka Karika, which is called the Ocean of Reasoning, and then that of the insight sections of Lamrim Chemo and its the smaller Lamrim, and also that of the distinguishing the definitive and the provisional teachings. To understand this, understand the teaching of emptiness, it would be really helpful. So by studying these, what you actually come to understand is that things are dependently originated, and therefore through this understanding, what happens is that you will gain the insight into how things have no existence. Things do not exist the way they appear to us. And therefore, you see the illusion-like nature of things. So divide of clinking, be released from bondage. And then next we go to the Master Tsongkhapa's text in praise of dependent origination. He who speaks on the basis of seeing that makes him the knower unexcelled, and he who speaks on the basis of teaching, that he becomes the teacher unexcelled. So what that refers to is, I bow to you, O conqueror, you who sought dependent origination. So seeing dependent origination is what is referred to. as making the Buddha the teacher and the knower unexcelled. John Lama Rinpoche, in his so dependence shows that things are dependent on other factors, and therefore the word in dependent origination, the word den or dependence refers to that of emptiness, the reality of how things are. And origination refers to the conventions of the world. So the reasoning of dependent origination is unlike the other reasonings to prove emptiness. The reasonings such as lack of one and many and so forth do not have the power to reject both the extremes at the same time. So what is the purpose of the teaching of dependent origination is said in the next verse. Whatever degenerations there are in the world, the root of all these is ignorance. So this root of suffering, as the Buddha taught even in the first teaching of the Buddha, the Four Noble Truths. So suffering do not come without any cause. Even in the case of theistic religions, for them too, the suffering that we experience is not something that is done by God as such, but because of our ignorance, we cause suffering to ourselves. You taught that it is dependent origination, the seeing of which will undo this ignorance. So the teaching of dependent origination dispels both the extremes of nihilism and eternalism. So how can an intelligent person not comprehend that this path of dependent origination is the essential point of your teaching? So Nagarjuna as it is said in a sutra, which says that what arises through conditions has no birth, essential birth, and so forth. So there are many teachings in which Buddha teaches that things are dependently originated and therefore they are empty. So what is the meaning of dependent origination? It says in verse number 5, whatever depends on conditions, that is devoid of intrinsic existence. So what is dependent on others do not have any intrinsic independent existence. What excellent instruction can there be more amazing than this proclamation? By grasping at it, the childish strengthens bondage to extreme views. For the wise, this very fact is the doorway to cut free from the net of elaborations. So, of course, people might use the reason that things do have intrinsic existence because this is what we see, that things are there, and that things do not happen just because we think this is so, such and such. So verse number 6 read. The realists, or in other words, those who assert some objectivity in things, what the reasons that they use to try to prove that things have some objective intrinsic existence is what the Prasangikas use to prove that there's no intrinsic existence. Since this teaching is not seen elsewhere, you alone are the teacher. Like calling fox a lion for the Tirthika, it would be a word of flattery. Wondrous teacher, wondrous future, wondrous speaker, wondrous savior, I pay homage to that teacher who taught well-dependent origination to help heal sentient beings. O benefactor, you have taught the peerless reason to ascertain emptiness, the heart of the teaching. This way of dependent origination, those who perceive it as contradictory or unestablished, how can they comprehend your system? So for the non-Buddhists who believe in an independent self, separate from the psychophysical aggregates, whereas the Buddhist tradition asserts that a person or a being is designated on the basis of the psychophysical aggregates. And so, for those who believe in an independent self or a soul, saying that a self does not have any intrinsic existence because it is dependent is a contradictory reason. Whereas for the realists, the Buddhist realists, for example, for them this reasoning is, for the non-Buddhists it's an unestablished reasoning, whereas for the Buddhists it's a contradictory reasoning. How can they comprehend your system? So for the non-Buddhists, this reasoning of dependent origination to prove that things have no intrinsic existence is unestablished, whereas for the Buddhist realists, it's a contradictory reason. For you when one sees emptiness in terms of meaning of dependent origination, so the emptiness means that things do not exist the way they appear to us, and as intrinsic or independent existence. So of course, when we don't do any critical analysis into how things are, we can talk about good, bad, and so forth. So when we say that something is beneficial to something else, it shows that what comes from those things is dependent on that which benefits them. And so just like cause and effect. So when being devoid of intrinsic existence and possessing valid function do not contradict. Whereas when we see, verse number 11, sorry. For you, when one sees emptiness in terms of the meaning of dependent origination, then being devoid of intrinsic existence and possessing valid functions do not contradict. So the actions and the agents and so forth are still valid in terms of dependent origination. And therefore, causes and conditions can bring about their effects. So when you actually explain emptiness, you should be able to actually also explain that the things are dependently originated. You may use the terms like devoid of elaboration and so forth. So this can be explained. The non-elaboration of things can be explained from the Dzogchen point of view, which also is connected to Tantra. Because when we explain the Dzogchen view, it has to be explained on the basis of understanding the tantric teaching of subjective clear light, from which it is explained that everything else arises. So in the case of Mahamudra too, this is the case. This is true. So Mahamudra and Dzogchen, or the Great Perfection, are related with the clear light, subjective clear light mind. So you can understand this from the teaching of the Master Tsongkhapa's tantric teachings. Whereas when one sees the opposite, since there can be no function in emptiness, nor emptiness in what has functions, one falls into the dreadful abyss you maintain. Therefore, in your teaching, seeing independent origination is hailed, that too not as an utter non-existence, nor as an intrinsic existence. The non-contingent is like a sky flower, hence there is nothing that is not dependent. If things exist through their essence, their dependence on causes and conditions for their existence is contradictory. Therefore, since no phenomena exists other than origination, through dependence no phenomena exists other than being devoid of intrinsic existence. You taught, because intrinsic nature cannot be negated. If phenomena possessed some intrinsic nature, nirvana would become impossible, and elaboration could not be seized, you taught. Therefore, who could challenge you, you who proclaimed with lion's roar in this assembly of learned ones repeatedly that everything is utterly free of intrinsic nature, that there is no intrinsic existence at all, and that all function as this arising independence of that? What need is there to say that these two converge without conflict? So verse number 22. Being enslaved by ignorance, those who fiercely oppose you, what is so astonishing about their being unable to bear the sound of no intrinsic existence? But so those of the Buddhists do assert dependent origination of things, from the Vaibhashikas up to Prasangikas. But having accepted dependent origination, the precious treasure of your speech, then not tolerating the roar of emptiness, this I find amazing indeed. The door that leads to non-intrinsic existence is this unexcelled door of dependent origination. Through its name alone, if one grasps at intrinsic existence, now this person who lacks the unrivaled entrance will well traveled by the noble ones. By what means should one guide him to the unexalted path that pleases you? Intrinsic nature, uncreated and contingent, dependent on origination, contingent and created. How can these two converge upon a single basis without contradictions? Therefore, whatever originates dependently through the, though primordially free of intrinsic existence. So if you do critical analysis, things do not have any intrinsic existence right from the beginning. But to us, because of our habituation with seeing the things having some kind of, the habituation with the ignorance, we see things having intrinsic existence. Appears as if it does possess intrinsic existence, so you taught all this to be like illusion. Through this very fact, I understand well the statement that to what you have taught, those opponents who challenge you cannot find faults that accord with reason. Why is this so? Because by declaring these, chances for reification and denigration towards things seen and unseen are made most remote. So with regard to the teaching of the Buddha, as I said earlier, we should follow the threefold process of listening or reading the teachings and reflecting on them and then meditating. So we should be able to use reasonings that really triggers transformation in us. through this very path of Tibetan origination, the rationale for your speech being peerless convictions arise in me also that your other words are valid too. You who speak excellently by seeing as it is. For those who train in your footsteps, all degenerations will become remote, for the root of all faults will be undone by those who turn away, but those who turn away from your teaching, though they may struggle with hardship for a long time, faults increase evermore, as if being called forth, for they make firm the view of self. When these wise comprehend the differences between these two, why would they not at that point revere you from the depths of their being? So with regard to Rinpoche himself, gaining insight into emptiness, he had a vision of Manjushri and asked some questions about emptiness. And Manjushri gave him some instruction, and Rinpoche replied that he had difficulty understanding those instructions. So Manjushri instructed him to study the classic texts and also go through the practices of purification and accumulating merit. So the instruction that Manjushri gave was to study the classic texts. And so it's not easy just because you have some vision of a deity, you would be able to gain insight into emptiness. That's not the case. And so Master Tsongkhapa was told by Manjushri to go into hermitage. And so at that point, his disciples said to Tsongkhapa that if you leave all these students, all these many students from whom who rely on you for teachings, and go to recluse an isolated place, then you would be criticized by others. And when this was related to Manjushri by Tsongkhapa, Manjushri said, whether you would be helpful to the beings and the Dharma, I would know it. And if people criticize you, then practice patience. And then, therefore, at that instruction of Manjushri to go into hermitage, then Master Tsongkhapa left with his 8 chief disciples, who are known as the Kor Thaba Namgye, which means the 8 pure disciples. And therefore, Tsongkhapa pursued the practice of purification and accumulation of merit and so forth, and then he had a dream of Nagarjuna and his disciples, and one of the disciples, Buddhapalita, came forth and touched a text on Tsongkhapa's head. And then the next day, Master Tsongkhapa was said to have gained insight into this subtle emptiness. And so Tsongkhapa was able to find this true insight into emptiness, where he was able to bring this understanding of dependent origination together with that of emptiness without contradiction. And so, having gained this very profound understanding and insight into emptiness and dependent origination, Master Tsongkhapa was able to generate or have a very special kind of faith in the teaching of in the Buddha himself. So alas, your teaching is such, in whosoever's ear it falls, they all attain peace. So who could not be honored to uphold your teaching? And the next verse, it overcomes all opposing challenges. So when you're able to understand that of dependent origination well, no opponent can actually challenge you. So because the Buddha's teaching, from beginning with those of the teaching on the Four Noble Truths up to the third turning of the wheel of Dharma, could be explained on the basis of how things are dependently originated, and therefore it is said it overcomes all opposing challenges. It's free from the contradictions between earlier and later parts. It grants fulfillment of being's two aims. For this system my joy increases evermore. For its sake you have given away again and again over countless eons, sometimes your body, at others your life, as well as your loving kin and resources of wealth. Seeing the qualities of this teaching pulls hard from your heart, just like what a hook does to a fish. Sad it is not to have heard it from you. The intensity of that sorrow does not let go from my mind, just like the mind of a mother constantly goes after her dear child. Here too, as I reflect on your words, I think, blazing with the glory of noble marks and hallowed in a net of light rays, this teacher, in voice of its pristine melody, spoke thus in this way. And the rest of the text. Appears in mind, it suits me as the moon's rays heal fever's pain. This excellent system, most marvelous, some individuals who are not so learned have entangled it in utter confusion, just like the tangled Belvazar grass. So in certain teachings, the Buddha seems to indicate there is self which is separate from the psychophysical aggregates, when he says that the five psychophysical aggregates are the load, and the person or the being is the carrier of the load. So based on the teachings of Maitreya, Master Sangha and his followers propagated that of the Chittamatra philosophical view. Because Abhisamaya Alamkara, for example, teaches different philosophical views, whereas Uttaratantra teaches that of the Prasangika view of emptiness. So Master So if you look at Master Bhaviveka's writings, which is the essence of Madhyamaka, and also its auto-commentary, the Blades of Reasoning, you'll be able to see that perhaps he was the first amongst the disciples or the followers of the Master Nagarjuna to write a text on philosophical systems. So verse number 46 shows how Tsongkhapa was intrigued to find all kinds of interpretation of the teaching of the Buddha, and it says that this excellent system, most marvelous, some individuals who are not so learned have entangled it with utter confusion, just like the tangled Palwaza grass. Seeing this situation, I strove with a multitude of efforts to follow after the learned ones, and sought your intention again and again. As at such times as I studied the numerous works of both our own middle way and other schools, my mind became tormented ever more constantly by a network of doubts. So the texts that Master Tsongkhapa studied are the commentaries to Mula Madhyamaka Karika, but the main text is that of Mula Madhyamaka Karika itself. And so it says that Night Lily Grove of Nagarjuna's treatises. So the six treatises of, or the collections of reasoning are the treatises written by Master Nagarjuna, and the main one of these six is that of Mula Madhyamaka Karika. So Nagarjuna, whom you prophesied, would unravel your unexalted vehicle as it is, shunning extremes of existence and non-existence, illuminated by the garland of white light of Chandra, Master Chandrakirti, Chandra's well-uttered insights. So here this refers to his two main texts, which are Prasana Pada, the lucid word, and the entering the middle way, Madhyamaka Avatara. Chandra, whose stainless wisdom orb is full, who glides freely across the scripture's space, who dispels the darkness of extremist hearts and outshines the constellations of false speakers. When through my teacher's kindness I saw this, my mind found a rest at last. Of all your deeds, your speech is supreme, and so forth. So in order to see how one should follow the teaching of the Buddha, it is said here, may the teaching of this beneficent one till world's end be unshaken by the winds of evil thoughts. May it always be filled with those who find conviction in the teacher by understanding the teaching's true nature. May I never falter even for an instant to uphold the excellent way of the sage, which illuminates the principle of dependent origination through all my births, even giving away my body and life. May I spend day and night carefully reflecting by what means can I enhance this teaching achieved by the Supreme Savior through strenuous efforts over countless eons. As I strive in this with pure intention, may Brahma, Indra, and the world's guardians and protectors such as Mahakala unswervingly always assist me. This hymn entitled Essence of the Word well-uttered insights, praising the unexcelled teacher, the great friend to the entire world, even to the unfamiliar, for teaching that profound dependent origination, was composed by the well-read monk Losang Dragpa. It was written at the heavenly retreat of Hlading on the towering mountain of Ödegungil, otherwise known as Garden Number Geweling. The scribe was Namkapel. So this text by Master Tsongkhapa actually gives us a good introduction to the teaching of the Buddha, how one should develop faith in the teaching through reason of understanding the dependent origination. So, by analyzing through reason the teaching of the Buddha himself, the kind and compassionate Buddha, so although we have all kinds of reasons to prove the truth of the teaching of the Buddha, I never say that that Buddhism is the best teaching. So I mean it from the depths of my heart. Some of you may have heard me. I have an Indian friend who is very religious-minded and faithful. And he asked me, he told me that everything in the universe is a creation of God, and God is full of infinite love. But among his creature, there are many who are troublemakers. Why did God create them? So, and then the God, the Creator, is also said to be almighty, full of love and mercy, and also omniscient. So if you look at the world today, rife with troubles, it seems that the time has come for God to withdraw the universe. So with regard to Buddhism, the teaching of the Buddha is interpreted by Vaibhashikas, Sutantrikas, Chittamatras and Madhyamakas, and then within these different schools of thought there are subdivisions as well. So they have different interpretations. We have different interpretations of the teaching of the Buddha, and therefore it is very important to use reason to understand the teaching of the Buddha. Therefore, following the teaching of Nagarjuna and so forth is very important. So the teaching of dependent origination and emptiness is to bring transformation within us, so that we are not led astray by our inappropriate mentation. So this is next is the teaching on the 17 Nalanda masters, praise or prayer to them. First is the verses homage to the Buddha, and then next comes a praise to Master Nagarjuna. And next comes Aryadeva. So Aryadeva was someone who was learned in all the philosophical systems of India, classical India. He's the crowning jewel of the followers of the Master Nagarjuna. So in Mulamadhyamaka Karika, the negative logic is used, where Nagarjuna says things do not arise from itself, from self, and no others, and so forth. So Buddhapalita comments on these verse by commenting that birth or arisal of things is explained in terms of convention. So next verse is praise to Master Buddhapalita. Next is Bhaviveka. Master Bhaviveka wrote the Lamp of Wisdom, which is a commentary to Mula Madhyamaka Karika, and he actually raises doubts about how the interpretation of Buddha Palita, and because of because of pointing out those doubts, the Chandrakirti was able to come up with his criticism or refutation of Bhaviveka in writing Prasannapada and so forth. So with regard to Master Bhaviveka, so he wrote The Essence of Madhyamaka and its auto-commentary, Targajwala, as I mentioned earlier. I'm not sure if we could start going through this the essence of the middle way today, but from tomorrow we'll go through it. And so Master Bhaviveka's a lamp of wisdom is very important text. And Ling Rinpoche, my late senior tutor, used to tell me that he had a special kind of a feeling that he felt towards Bhaviveka. Lama Su Sergong Dorji Chang, during his teachings in public, used to say that in our monastic institutions, we used to actually criticize Bhaviveka for not having understood the import of the reasoning that is used by Buddha Palita. But if Master Bhaviveka himself appeared before you, perhaps you would actually agree with him. So many of the Madhyamaka texts have the transmission that we could receive, but Master Bhaviveka's Madhyamaka Hridaya does not have that transmission, and therefore I asked Khenpo Sakya Master Khenpo Kunga Wangchuk to write an annotated commentary to this text so that I could receive the transmission of it. And so I feel that I have made some contribution to this, to pass on this transmission of the Madhyamaka, essence of the Madhyamaka. So next is the praise to Chandrakirti, who was a master of Bodh Sutra and Tantra. And next is a praise to Master Shantideva. So in central part of Tibet, the teaching of Shantideva's Bodhisattvacharya Avatara was not so prevalent for some time, and so I have been doing my best to pass on the transmission of this text. And next is the prayer to Chandarakshita. And then next comes Kamalashila. he was a very kind master to us. Until this day, the fact that we have the tradition of explaining the Nalanda tradition, the writings of the Nalanda masters, is thanks to Shanda Rakshita and his disciple Kamalashila. So there are many Buddhist countries in the world today, and then there are many who follow the Nalanda tradition. We can talk about the China, Tibet, and Mongolia. But the tradition of memorizing the text and then explaining them word for word, and then using logic based on the logical texts and to scrutinize the teaching thoroughly. This exists amongst the Tibetans alone. So Shanda Rakshita instructed the Tibetans to translate the teachings into Tibetan, so that the Tibetans may not have to use Sanskrit as the medium, but use their own language. So, in today's world, to explain the Nalanda tradition thoroughly, Tibetan language is the best one. So the richness of the teaching of the Buddha in Tibetan is because earlier Tibetan language was a primitive language. Very few words existed, whereas while the translations were carried out, the Tibetan translators coined new words and therefore the Tibetan words, vocabulary, Dharma vocabulary became enriched as the translations were carried out. And therefore, today, the Nalanda tradition can be explained fully in our language. So we can see how, and then we can feel the gratitude to the Tibetan emperors and translators and those of the Indian Panditas. So amongst the followers of our religions, there are people who find it a little bit uneasy to talk about science as such. Whereas the follower of Nalanda tradition, especially like us, who use much reasoning, we find it easy to go together with modern scientists. So because we follow reasoning, it gives us this courage and the pride to sit together with scientists and have dialogues. So thanks to our Tibetan emperors, the translators, we could feel proud of this Nalanda Buddhist tradition that we are following. So in the past, we remained isolated, whereas since becoming exiles, we have had the opportunity to share this rich cultural tradition, the Nalanda Buddhist tradition, with the rest of the world, which is based on reason, which could be explained through reason. So coming into exile is like a blessing in disguise for us Tibetans. So we have, of course, we are exiles. But if we could make it worthwhile, if we could make ourselves worthy of becoming exiles, then the Tibetans inside Tibet would also feel inspired. And they would also feel that the Tibetan tradition, the religion and culture, as well as language, will never die out. And we who are in exile also, we can feel inspired by those of our fellow Tibetans inside Tibet for the very strong and firm spirit that they have. So all three provinces of Tibet have become united since we became exiled. So in the past, for example, my birthplace and sealing area people did not really know the Central Tibetan administration. I mean, the government, Gaden Podang government as such. So the fellow Tibetans inside and those in exile, we have this spirit, this excellent spirit, which is not, with which we do not seek victory for ourselves and defeat for our others, but we are a strong people since the time of, which is the product of our emperors. Today in China proper there are over nearly 400 million Buddhists, and so we could also be of service to them. We could explain to Chinese brothers and sisters that we are not seeking independence, but we wish to live within the People's Republic of China, enjoying the same rights and freedom as provided in the Constitution of PRC. So we are not only talking about Tibetans when we talk about happiness, seeking or bringing happiness to all sentient beings. We are not only talking about Tibetans, and within Tibetans, the people of the different regions and so forth. But the galaxies are infinite. In our text, there is mention of hundreds of millions of world systems, the trichilocosm, which are the hundreds and millions in number. So that the galaxies, of course, may not be directly related to us, and also the animals, whether they are living in the waters or on land, we can't do much for them as well. Although we do pray for the happiness of all sentient beings, practically what we can do for are those of the human beings. They are the ones whom we can help. And so Tibet and China, politically, of course, in the past were independent, but although politically we have some differences, but we could still consider the Chinese as our brothers and sisters and share our own religion, our culture, and so forth. So today, more and more Chinese are taking interest in our culture, religion, and so forth. and we are not discriminating against them. So the past emperors and ministers and so forth, those great bodhisattvas, have actually united the whole of Tibet in the past. So we who are in exile are proud that we have been able to preserve our own culture and so forth. So the people in the administration, the central administration and so forth, Gundeling Zasak and Wangdorla and so forth, Tsongkhapa and so forth, have done their best. We're really dedicated people. Those past generations have done well. We're very dedicated, and as a result, we have an exile organization, Central Tibetan Administration, and we are at a time when we can say that we would be able to, or we are able to contribute to the world at large from our tradition. And so I always say that those who have been dedicated to the preservation and promotion of our culture, tradition and so forth have made their human life worthwhile. And so today, those who are in the central administration, to you also, I would like to thank you. The Tibetan cause there will be a sunny day for Tibet. So we should really see things from wider perspective, not just be narrow-minded. So that sunny day is going to be soon. There, so the 13 classic texts written by the Nalanda masters, we are the ones who are the custodians of these classic texts, and we do study them. So in Master Nagarjuna and Aryadeva and so forth did not sit together and chant prayers with these deep, called multiphonic voice and so forth, but they wrote texts and they taught their students, and in this way they preserved and promoted the teaching. And so in the past, Sakya monasteries were, Sakya tradition was well known for the classic studies of the classic texts, and Sakya Pandita himself wrote the treasury of reasoning or logic. And so it was very prevalent in Sakya tradition in the past to study the classic texts, but today, if we have to actually search for those who are the true custodians of this tradition of learning the classic texts of the Nalanda masters, we would find the densas, the seeds of learning, the Drepung Sera and Ganden, and so forth. And so far, even after coming into exile, we have our people in these monasteries have done well, and we should still keep up with our good work. So the prayer to Chandrakshita and Kamalashila then. And next comes Arya Sangha, and after him comes Vasubandhu. And then after him comes Dignaga, and Dignaga and Dharmakirti were well-known masters of logic and epistemology. So in the second chapter of Pramana Vartika by Dharmakirti, he actually explains the verse of homage written by Dignaga in his Pramana Samuchaya in an excellent way. So some time ago, I had discussions with Thai monks on the Four Noble Truths, the 16 characteristics, and also the 37 factors of enlightenment. And I asked them whether they explained these on the basis of scriptural quotations or reasoning. And they said scriptural quotations. And then immediately I reflected on the Dignaga and Dharmakirti. And Dharmakirti says, on the basis of understanding impermanence, we understand how suffering comes about, and on the basis of insight into suffering, we could gain insight into selflessness and so forth. So these are based on reasoning. And then next comes Vimuktisena. And after Vimuktisena comes Haribhadra. So Haribhadra is the commentator to the Panchaparamita scripture based on Abhisamaya Alamkara by Maitreya. And then next is Gunaprabha for our Vinaya practice of monastic code of discipline. So we study Gunaprabha's Vinaya Sutra on the basis of Kunchen Tsonawa's commentary. One year, I met some Thai masters. So I told them that there are some differences between us, and they agreed. And then I explained about the Vinaya tradition that we follow, saying that we follow the Mula Sarvastivada tradition, whereas you, that in Thailand, follow that of the Theravada tradition in Pali. And our Vinaya texts are in Sanskrit. And then we went through the different vows, such as the 4 defeats and the 13 remainders and so forth. And when I explained these Vinaya rules to them, they were quite surprised and said that, oh, you too, Tibetans, you too have the Vinaya practice. So in the past, Tibetan tradition was known as Lamaism. So they found it quite surprising that the Tibetans have the Vinaya practice, and they asked me if you have really this kind of a very detailed practice of Vinaya, and I said yes. So today what we should do is we should not discriminate against the Theravada or the Pali tradition, but we should actually sit together, gather and have discussions with the Pali tradition, upholders of the Pali tradition, and we could also exchange with each other so that we could actually have the translations of the text from Pali into Tibetan and Tibetan to Pali and so forth. So we have the three collections of the teaching of the Buddha, Sutra, Vinaya and Abhidharma. So Vinaya is something which is a shared practice. So we need to really have more gatherings and sharings amongst ourselves. And after Gunaprabha comes the prayer to Shakyaprabha. And then next comes Master Atisha, the kind master who's made the teaching of the Buddha flourish in Tibet. And then the next verse is about maturing and liberating oneself. How do we do that? Is through the understanding of the two truths, based on which we understand the Four Noble Truths and understand how we come into and exit from samsara, and then finds conviction in the three jewels and so forth. And next is a prayer to become someone like those of the 17 Nalanda masters. And next is avoiding wrong living, so that the monastics and so forth could live right living, and the teaching of the Buddha may spread on the face of this earth. So for the last 2,500 and more years, the teaching of the Buddha has lived in this world. So today, so not saying that this is my tradition, the teaching of the Buddha, but by really being unbiased and then with a skeptical attitude towards the teaching, we should search the teaching of the Buddha, investigate into the teaching of the Buddha, and therefore I found it indispensable to study the teachings, the writings of the 17 Nalanda masters. And on top of this, the traditional 6 ornaments and 2 sublime masters, of whom there are Thangpa paintings. I have added 9 more, such as Buddha Palita and so forth, and made up the 17 Nalanda masters and commissioned the Thangpa painting of it. I am who am at the last row of the followers of the Nalanda tradition, Tenzin Gyatso. I wrote it in 2001, December 15, 2001, in Tejing Churling, Dharamsala, Kangra district, Himachal Pradesh, India. So we have done the Jataka tale, reading the Jataka tale, and So you have the book of the teaching, in praise of the Buddha for teaching Tibetan origination, and also the 8 verses of mind training. So the 8 verses, of course, teach the bodhicitta and understanding independent origination. But if you really if you want to understand in detail the dependent origination of things, you should study Master Nagarjuna's Mula Madhyamaka Karika. So when I was young, I was very nervous when I had to attend the Monlam prayer festival, especially the afternoon session, when I had to recite all, from memory, the different prayers. So I felt as if I was fainting. So when we reach the point of reciting the prayer where it says, so it was the first time that I felt such nervousness that I couldn't see the pigeons that were flying around in Chokhang area. So it was not only me who felt such nervousness during the Monlam prayer session. So one of the Gaden Tripas was actually presiding over Monlam prayer, and he was called by the 13th Dalai Lama. And instead of that Gaden Tripa, someone else was put on the throne, and the person, when the prayer was done, then people found that he had actually wetted the throne, the cushion. So these are verses from Master Nagarjuna's Ratnavali.
Dage dewa dangwa ye tenma yuren ba yu je ngengwe nebe cheda range zowa yono we senje bowa sheve je tenma lemba ba yu je boda bomo chuma da nora nanje jinda je janjo cheda we tenma yuren ba yu je dage sanje ranjan je nyede bada mada ne danzon dala je je we tenma yuren ba yu je gewa jewa doma da dunga nazo Janjo dondo dozebe tenma yuren ba yu je dage Kado yere tejeju shoujo sanje ngejebe tenpa yere bagyoje dange zuru dadebe dado denje bar simje damje redendo dade yere bagyoje zudu dado denjeje simje nyemoy simje ngezu jejube tenpa yere sambe namda zumeda denze gange jenye ba gobe dedu dage tenpa yere bagyoje dendo dage ne kado nada denjeje denje doma nyedebe dage tenpa bagyoje sewa juyi 소와 용소 당조지 야나니라 추서 남바 배조지 당외 딩베 심자나 참배서와 메조지 대바송라라 괴베 추주주주제 당외 탑지 요바나 심제 당외 레조지 야다달라 괴제베 추네 제 나와 배교지 다게 쓸게 동지 염모멜에 타제베 다게 배대 번제데 다고 유레네 교지 다게 모두 제셰다 다외 줄레데 야다다라고 제베 나고다도 그주지 유레데모 주게자고 송가고 주주 남가베 이게 성모죠 너 퇴제모 성모죠 주 도도 신